Day, low 40s.
Now, the Grandy Group on 630.
8:07 on the Grandy Group. It's Brian Eban and Fred Grandy with you this morning.
Yesterday at about 8:35, our guest was the new chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Peter King, who has taken a lot of heat because he is going to use congressional hearings to talk about what he calls the radicalization of American Muslims and is going right full bore against political correctness. Listen to this piece in the Washington Post that came out on Monday. The House hearings, scheduled to begin next month, have touched off a wave of panic throughout the U.S. Muslim community, which has spent much of the last year battling what it sees as the rising tide of Islamophobia. Interesting term, Islamophobia. Not exactly what you might think. And if you want to read a great piece on it, I recommend Michael Ledeen's latest piece in pajamasmedia.com. Michael Ledeen, a freedom scholar at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, contributor to Pajamas Media, and our guest on the Grandy Group. Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's talk a little bit about Islamophobia. This term has an interesting political beginning, doesn't it?
It does, and I hadn't known it until I read an essay by a Frenchman named Bruckner. The term was invented by radical Iranian followers of the Ayatollah Khomeini in the late 1970s, and they used it as a weapon against Muslims who criticized them for being too extreme.
So, in other words, it was created by a radical element to make other elements look more radical than them, it sounds like.
Yes, and it was also created to make us, secular critics or Western critics of radical Islam, look just as extremist as the next guy.
So in a political war like of which we're dealing with right now in terms of political correctness, this is a pretty strong tool because it is used really as a cudgel now against people like Peter King, and I suppose arguments like this and your piece in Pajamas Media.
It's used to silence political critics like Peter King, but it is also used against moderate Muslims who don't want their religion totally dominated by extremists. I mean, there are Muslims who want to talk about, I don't know, divorce, equal rights for women, things like that, and Islam, and they're just called Islamophobes, and that silences them.
And how is it working?
It's working.
Yeah, I mean,
it's working all too well.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, it's working quite well. I mean, look at this country. Look how frightened people are to call radical extremists radical extremists.
Well, that was one of the things that Congressman King said yesterday. He said if I had decided to have hearings after, for example, the Fort Hood shootings on radical Christian evangelical groups, I would get none of the heat that I'm getting now. But I've never heard the term Christianophobia or evangelicalophobia. This seems to be focused entirely by a group that is trying to use our own heightened political correctness against us.
Right, and the reason I wrote that piece in Pajamas Media was because I'd read a really brilliant essay by Pascal Bruckner, a French philosopher, who was the first person that I had seen who had actually explored this term historically and philosophically and explained both where it comes from and how it works, and it's fascinating and important. The point is that this campaign against critics of radical Islam is not accidental and it's not visceral. It's planned and it's logical, and it's part of a campaign.
So it's not reflexive the way some of the race debates in this country are. It really is part of a deeper political agenda.
Right, and that's why Bruckner argues, and I agree, that we should ban the word.
Oh,
I mean,
wow!
Just don't use it. Don't accept it, reject it. Don't use it.
But my question is, when I say how is it working, by that I mean, why are we afraid of that word as non-Muslims, and why are moderate Muslims afraid of that word? Why is it having an effect on our psyche?
Because it's because of the canons of political correctness. Because they managed to make everybody believe that if you were an Islamophobe, you were politically incorrect because you were intolerant, you were biased, you were bigoted, and all of that. Instead of accepting criticism of some aspects of Islam as legitimate, as we accept criticism of some aspects of all other religions, they just banned the whole concept. They banned any criticism of Islam and made it part of political correctness. I mean, it's very hard. When guest speakers go on college campuses today who are critical of Islam, and we all know who those people are, There's riots on college campuses, and nobody says boo.
Well, I would assume the same thing is going to happen when Congressman King tries to compile his list of witnesses. There are two members of Congress who are practicing Muslims. One of them, Keith Ellison, has already accused him of Islamophobia. But you referred to this piece by Pascal Bruckner. Now, obviously, this has to be even more radioactive in Europe than it is in this country, because you got people, you refer to this in your own piece, this guy in Copenhagen who's the head of the Free Speech Society, who is being accused of hate speech because he's criticizing Muslims for murdering their own women.
Yes. Well, that's going on here, too, after all. There's a big fight over it. There is an honor killing, so-called, trial going on here. I don't remember where it is. It's too early in the morning for that.
Well, but you've also got Molly Norris, that cartoonist who is underground because supposedly she was political.
Right.
Now, why isn't there a phobia, a reverse phobia for her?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
We should come up with a name.
Well, and all the advocates of free speech, all the First Amendment protectors, and so on, where are they when these people get tarnished and slimed?
I don't quite understand how this particular movement, whether it's driven just by the Muslim Brotherhood or various associations or moving from Europe to this country, how they've become so good at taking our own First Amendment protections and using it against this. This is a level of cunning that I haven't seen in a political movement, particularly in this country.
Well, I think that it's part of a much broader movement to take over the culture, which is going on for a long time.
All right, you mentioned that this was started by Iranian Islamists in '79 and helped bring down the Shah.
Yes.
Is this kind of what's going on in Egypt today? Is it similar to that, or is it the reverse, where you have maybe more freedom with the internet and things like that, and people are saying no to these Islamic thugs, or are they a part of the Muslim Brotherhood? What's going on in Egypt, I guess, essentially, is my question.
I think what's going on in Egypt is what is going on in Yemen and in Jordan and in Algeria and Tunisia and so forth, is everybody's on the streets. And good guys and bad guys we would like to see win, people who really want to be free and have free societies, and people like the Muslim Brotherhood who want the opposite, who want to just capitalize on this discontent and take over an Egypt, for example, and turn it into a second Iran. So we don't know who's going to win. But what's so alarming about our non-foreign policy and our foreign policy that's been shaped by this kind of nonsensical political correctness for years is that we're not able to make these distinctions, seemingly. And so we don't know what side we're on. We don't know who's who or what's what. It's a replay of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 in that sense.
So just going back to Egypt for a minute, do you see Egypt becoming more like Iran if it remains unstable like this? Is that what the net result is going to be? I
don't know. What I'm afraid of is that the tyrannical regime of Hosni Mubarak, which I don't like, will be overthrown by radical Muslims led by the Muslim Brotherhood, who will make it even worse. My grandmother always used to say, things are never so bad they can't get worse. And it's true that Egypt's bad, and it's true that Mubarak is a disgusting tyrant, and it's true that we should have been on his case for years to get Egypt to become more liberal, more tolerant, more open, etc. We didn't. So here we are, and now we have very, very nasty choices to make.
And I guess one of the things I want to make sure we're talking about whether we're talking about Islamophobia or the creation of the hijab. These are effectively modern political instruments. They don't go all the way back to the Quran. They don't necessarily echo the teachings and the hadiths handed down from Muhammad to...
Correct. So far as I know, there's nothing in the hadith or in the Quran that requires women to cover themselves. In fact, in big parts of the world like Indonesia, where there's an awful lot of Muslim women, they don't cover their heads, and lots of Iraqi women don't too.
But apparently, under the present political correctness, if you don't do that, and you're one of these supposed moderate Muslims, then you're Islamophobic yourself.
Yeah, well, the president even bragged about this in his speech in Cairo.
I know. That's what's
crazy.
All right, Michael, good to talk to you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Ledeen here on the Grandi Group, Freedom Scholar, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, also with